Hi again. Chapter 7 of Christianity and the Social Crisis by Walter Rauschenbusch is entitled, What to Do? We rest our case. We have seen that in the prophetic religion of the Old Testament and in the aims of Jesus Christ, the reconstruction of the whole of human life in accordance with the will of God and under the motive power of religion was the ruling purpose. Primitive Christianity, while under the fresh impulse of Jesus, was filled with social forces. In its later history, the reconstructive capacities of Christianity were paralyzed by alien influences. But through the evolution of the Christian spirit in the Church, it has now arrived at a stage in its development where it is fit and free for its largest social mission. At the same time, Christian civilization has arrived at the great crisis of its history and is in the most urgent need of all moral power to overcome the wrongs which have throttled other nations and civilizations. The Church, too, has its own power and future at stake in the issues of social development. Thus, the will of God revealed in Christ and in the highest manifestations of the religious spirit, the call of human duty and the motives of self-protection, alike summon Christian men, singly and collectively, to put their hands to the plow and not to look back, till public morality shall at least as much be Christianized as private morality now is. The question then immediately confronts us. What social changes would be involved in such a religious reorganization of life? What institutions and practices of our present life would have to cease? What new elements would have to be embodied? What social ideals should be the ultimate aim of Christian men? And what practical means and policies should they use for its attainment? These questions exceed the scope of this book. This closing chapter will merely undertake to suggest in what ways the moral forces latent in Christian society can be aroused and mobilized for the progressive regeneration of social life, and in what chief directions these forces should be exerted. Now he has a subhead, No Thoroughfare. There are certain lines of endeavor which lead nowhere. Christian men have again and again attempted to find the way out of the maze in these directions, but experience has set up the sign, No Thoroughfare. One of these futile efforts is the attempt to make economic development revert to earlier stages. Christian men of conservative spirit recoil from the swift pace and impersonal hugeness of modern industry and look back to the simpler processes and more personal contact between master and men as a better and more Christian social life. The personal interest of the intelligent Christian middle class is likely to run in the same direction. Thus, in our country, we have the outcry of that class against the trusts and the department stores, and the insistence on returning to the simple competition of small concerns. But it is safe to say that no such return would be permanent. These great industrial undertakings extend the area within which cooperation and the correlation of forces rule, and competition is no match for cooperation. Our effort must rather be to preserve all the benefits which the elaboration of the productive machinery has worked out, but to make these benefits enrich the many instead of the few. Reform movements arising among the business class are often reactionary. They seek to revert to outgrown conditions and turn the shadow on the dial backward. Socialism is almost unique in accepting as inevitable and desirable the essential achievements of industrial organization, but only as halfway stages towards a vaster and far juster social system. For the same reasons, it is futile to attempt to reform modern society on biblical models. The principle underlying the Mosaic land system is wholly right. The spirit pervading the Hebrew laws, protecting the laborer and the poor, is so tender and noble that it puts us to shame. But these legal prescriptions were adjusted to an agricultural and stationary population, organized under patriarchal and tribal coherence, and they would be wholly unworkable under modern conditions. It is rather our business to catch the bold and humane spirit of the prophetic tribunes of the people, and do as well in our day as they did in theirs. Nothing could be more valuable than to understand the social contents of the Bible in their historical setting and press home on the Christian church the essential purpose and direction of its own inspired book. But here too it is true that the letter killeth, it is the Spirit that quickeneth. One of the most persistent mistakes of Christian men has been to postpone social regeneration to a future era to be inaugurated by the return of Christ. In former chapters, the origin of this hope and its original beauty and power have been discussed. It was at the outset a triumphant assertion of faith against apparent impossibilities. It still enshrines the social hope of Christianity and concedes that sometime the social life of men is to pass through a radical change and be ruled by Christ. But the element of postponement in it today means a lack of faith in the present power of Christ and paralyzes the religious initiative. It ignores the revelation of God contained in 19 centuries of continuous history. It is careful not to see the long succession of men and churches and movements that stake all their hopes and all their chances of social improvement on this expectation and were disappointed. It is true that any regeneration of society can come only through the act of God and the presence of Christ. But God is now acting, and Christ is now here. To assert that means not less faith, but more. To assert that means not less faith, but more. It is true that any effort at social regeneration is dogged by perpetual relapses and doomed forever to fall short of its aim. But the same is true of our personal efforts to live a Christian life. It is true also of every local church and of the history of the church at large. Whatever argument would demand the postponement of social regeneration to a future era will equally demand the postponement of personal holiness to a future life. We must have the faith of the apostolic church in the triumph of Christ over the kingdoms of the world, plus the knowledge which 19 centuries of history have given to us. Unless we add that knowledge, the faith of the apostles becomes our unbelief. Next time he deals with, what about this newfangled thing, socialism, communistic colonies? I'll put in a link to his previous discussion of the wonderful Jubilee system of the Old Testament. As far as we know, that Jubilee system was never tried. There's no record of its being fully exerted during any period of Israel's history up to the coming of Christ. Nevertheless, it's there in the book, in Leviticus. So I'll put in a link to Rauschenbusch comments on the Jubilee system earlier in this book.